Welcome to the Urban Herald. We're the investigative team that guides you through these deep dives, and today we are pulling back the curtain on what is truly a global crisis.
It is. It's an issue that fundamentally undermines the whole idea of universal human rights.
We're talking about the continuing state-sponsored criminalization of LGBTQIA plus people.
And the statistics our team at the Urban Herald has aggregated are, frankly, chilling. As of this month, November 2025, we're looking at a minimum of 64 nations.
64.
64. That's nearly a third of all countries on the planet, 32.8% to be exact, that still actively criminalize their own citizens just based on who they are or who they love.
That number is just staggering. It represents millions and millions of people whose lives, whose safety and, basic dignity are legally undermined by their own government.
Exactly.
And while, yes, we've seen some positive movement, that number is down a bit from around 70 countries back in 2019, the reality in late 2025 is still incredibly stark. You have huge parts of the world's population living under this shadow.
A shadow of systematic discrimination and, in many cases, state violence.
Yeah.
And that's precisely why we felt this analysis was so important. Our mission today is to really cut through the noise, to look at the historical structures behind this, and to expose the evolving methods of repression that are being used right now.
We want to give you, our listener, a complete, rich analysis of how this persecution actually works on a global scale.
And we have to start with the latest, most disturbing trend, because it's a perfect example of how these repressive models get copied and pasted across borders.
We're looking at Central Asia here. Just this month, November 2025, Kazakhstan's parliament proposed some sweeping new restrictions.
This is a huge development. This proposed propaganda ban is, it's a direct copy of Russia's playbook.
A carbon copy.
If it passes, it won't just be about enforcing old prejudices. It would ban basically any public discussion, any media, any expression of non-heterosexual relationships. It's a really aggressive move to just erase LGBTQ people from the public square in Kazakhstan.
And it signals a strategy. Right. This isn't just a one-off.
It's a regional strategy. So what we're really dealing with is a dynamic problem. This isn't about old, dusty laws that are just forgotten on the books.
No, this is active. This is systematic discrimination that is constantly being updated, weaponized, and it's aggressively impacting fundamental rights across entire continents.
That's the core tension we need to explore today. You've got the heavy, enduring weight of colonial history crashing into the sophisticated and, frankly, frightening innovation of modern repressive tactics.
It's a crisis that demands a really thorough examination.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start by mapping this out, because the burden of this criminalization is, well, it's incredibly uneven across the globe.
It is. And that concentration tells you a lot about the roots of the problem.
So where is it heaviest?
Africa. Africa currently bears the heaviest load. Our data shows approximately 31 nations on the continent still have these laws.
31. So that's more than half the countries in Africa.
More than half. And it reflects the profound, just lasting impact of colonial legal codes, which we are absolutely going to get into in more detail.
Right behind Africa is Asia, a massive, hugely diverse region, but we're seeing roughly 22 countries there actively criminalizing people.
And this really covers the full spectrum. You've got Central Asian states like Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, which often get overlooked in these discussions, all the way to Middle Eastern nations that enforce extremely restrictive interpretations of, various legal systems, including Sharia law.
So the mechanisms might be different.
The mechanisms vary. Prison, capital punishment. But the effect is exactly the same. Legal oppression.
There is one really powerful counterexample on this map, though. One continent that stands apart.
Europe.
Europe.
It stands as the only continent that is entirely free from these kinds of criminalizing laws. Now, that does not mean discrimination doesn't exist there. Of course it does.
Yeah.
But it shows that state-level criminalization isn't inevitable. It can be overcome. The unevenness of the map just underscores that these laws are historical, they're political, and in most cases they were imposed. They're not some kind of inherent cultural norm.
Okay, let's pivot to the flashpoints that have really defined 2025, because they show just how aggressive this is right now. Beyond Kazakhstan, which we just mentioned, we have to talk about Hungary.
Hungary is a really alarming case. It's a member of the European Union, and it's aggressively escalating its surveillance and persecution tactics. It's a direct confrontation with the EU's core values.
Right, inside the union.
Unprecedented inside the Union. The legislation they brought in back in March 2025 is, well, it's shocking.
It's this fusion of, like, high-tech surveillance and targeted persecution.
Exactly. The new law allows the state to use facial recognition technology at public gatherings. Think Pride events.
So they're tracking people.
They are identifying and tracking them. And on top of that, it imposes criminal penalties, including potential jail time, on the organizers of these events. This goes way beyond restricting speech like the Russian model.
Yeah, this is about creating a database.
This is about identifying, tracking, and punishing people using sophisticated state infrastructure. It turns a fundamental democratic right, the right to protest, into a state surveillance trap.
And these national strategies, they don't stay contained, do they? We're seeing these ripple effects globally. It's a transnational movement.
A major source of concern is how domestic policy debates in powerful nations like the United States just reverberate everywhere.
You're talking about things like Project 2025. For anyone listening who might not be familiar, this is a conservative initiative in the U.S. proposing huge changes to federal policy, and a lot of them target transgender rights.
Right. And discussions around that have been cited internationally.
How does that ripple out? How does that work?
It provides a blueprint and, maybe more importantly, a justification. Human rights monitors are warning that when you have proposed federal restrictions in the U.S., like rolling back healthcare protections for trans people, it signals to other conservative nations that they can get away with similarly extreme measures without, significant geopolitical backlash.
So it emboldens them.
It emboldens them. Nations in Eastern Europe, in Africa, in Asia, they see a powerful Western nation validating policies that were previously seen as, well, extreme.
We also have some deeply troubling reports coming out of West Africa, specifically Burkina Faso, following the military government's consolidation of power there.
Yeah, that situation is very complex. It's incredibly difficult to get comprehensive legal analysis out of there right now.
Because of press restrictions.
Exactly. The military regime has clamped down hard on press freedom and civil society groups. But the pattern is, unfortunately, predictable. When political stability erodes, when civilian governments fall, marginalized groups, and LGBTQ people specifically, are often the first to face new legal threats.
As the new regime tries to assert its authority.
Assert dominance and claim some kind of moral high ground. So, whether it's propaganda laws in Kazakhstan, high-tech surveillance in Hungary, or the quiet consolidation of power in Burkina Faso, the map of persecution is actively being redrawn and hardened in 2025.
So if that's the scope of the problem, we need to talk about the severity. The most extreme end of this persecution.
Yes. We have to talk about the death penalty. Because in at least 12 countries, execution is still a legally prescribed punishment for consensual same-sex activity.
That is the ultimate denial of the right to life. It's the most chilling reality of this entire crisis. We need to be very clear about which nations have this in their legal framework.
The list includes Afghanistan, Brunei, Iran, Mauritania.
Or Nigeria, but specifically the 12 northern states under Sharia law.
Right. Then you have Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, the United Arab Emirates, Uganda, and Yemen.
These laws, they're not just about punishment, are they? They're designed to terrorize.
Absolutely. The goal is to use the fear of execution to enforce total secrecy, to stop any kind of community from forming. Let's look at the legal mechanics in a few of the most extreme cases.
We should start with Saudi Arabia. Their use of Sharia law is, it's a very sophisticated tool for political control, disguised as moral policing.
Under their law, married men who engage in same-sex relationships can be stoned to death. But what's really horrifying and insightful is how the state conflates these so-called moral crimes with terrorism.
You're referring to that 2019 mass execution.
Yes. The Saudi government executed 37 men, mostly for things like espionage or terrorism. But crucially, 5 of those men had also been convicted of same-sex intercourse. And there were reports their confessions were extracted under torture.
So they're linking homosexuality directly to crimes against the state.
Precisely. By tying it to treason or terrorism, the government elevates a moral threat into a national security threat. It justifies the most extreme punishment and basically neutralizes any international criticism.
It makes any form of nonconformity seem like an act of war against the state itself.
Exactly. Now, Iran's penal code is different, but just as harsh. For men, homosexual intercourse is punishable by death. Lesser acts like kissing can lead to flogging. For women, It's 100 lashes, and only on the fourth conviction does the penalty become death.
So the punishments are all structured differently, but the constant is state-sanctioned physical violence, up to and including the ultimate penalty.
Now, look at Yemen. The case there from February 2024 shows this dangerous expansion we're seeing, this shift from criminalizing what you do to criminalizing who you are.
That's a critical distinction.
Yemen's old penal code already had death by stoning for married men. But this recent ruling from a Houthi-controlled court went much further. They sentenced 13 students to death for spreading homosexuality.
Spreading it, so not for an act, but for an idea.
Correct. The evidence was their social media posts, their private communications. This is an extremely dangerous ideological leap.
Because it's targeting visibility itself.
It's targeting visibility. The state is signaling that simply being openly LGBTQIA plus NAS, or even just talking about it, is a capital offense. It's an ideological war being fought with the penal code, and digital surveillance is providing the evidence.
We have to spend some real time on Uganda's Anti-Homosexuality Act, May 2023. This is probably the most globally visible and devastating new law we've seen in years.
Its severity is, it's hard to overstate. It sets out life imprisonment for consensual same-sex acts, but then it introduces this concept of aggravated homosexuality.
And that's where the death penalty comes in.
That's the death penalty. It covers things like repeated acts, sex involving a minor or an elderly person, or, and this is shocking, the transmission of HIV through a homosexual act.
That part is just so perverse. The public health implications are disastrous.
It creates a system that actively punishes vulnerability. It will absolutely accelerate the HIV/AIDS epidemic because it drives people away from testing and treatment. They're afraid a diagnosis could be used as evidence in a capital case.
And the law was implemented immediately.
Immediately. By August 2023, a 20-year-old man was the first person charged with aggravated homosexuality. He is facing death right now.
The legal framework in Nigeria is also defined by this sort of dual system, right?
Yes, it's very complex. You have a federal penal code, and then you have Sharia law in the 12 northern states. Federally, it's up to 14 years in prison. But in those northern states, Sharia law allows for the death penalty.
And even if executions aren't common, the law's existence just enables constant persecution.
That's the key. The law is the foundation for this pervasive climate of fear. People are routinely detained, tortured for confessions, extorted by police, harassed by community members who feel empowered by the state's position. The threat of the law is a structural weapon.
And that climate of terror shapes every single aspect of life, even in places where the penalty is rarely, if ever, carried out. Let's talk about Brunei or Mauritania, where they have moratoriums.
Brunei is the perfect example. Their Sharia penal code allows for death by stoning. Now, in 2019, they said they would maintain a moratorium on executions that's been in place since the 90s.
Okay, so no executions.
But the law is still fully active. So instead of execution, the punishment is typically whipping, plus long prison sentences, up to 30 years for men.
So the state gets to look merciful to the outside world by not executing anyone, while still holding this ultimate threat over its LGBTQ population.
It's political theater, but it's backed by an existential threat. The state keeps its ultimate legal tool. Mauritania is similar. The law allows for the death penalty, but there's been a de facto moratorium since 1987. The persecution, however, continues. Arbitrary arrests, harassment, intense societal stigma.
It's all designed to force people into the deepest secrecy.
To prevent them from accessing any legal rights, from forming any kind of supportive community, it's total social control.
This analysis really forces us to look at the history. To understand why 31 nations in Africa and so many in Asia still have these laws, you have to talk about colonialism.
The irony is just staggering.
It's profound.
What's historically compelling is that most of the criminalizing nations in Africa are just enforcing laws that were imposed on them during British, French, or Portuguese rule. These laws often violently disrupted or just erased indigenous attitudes about sexuality, which were frequently far more fluid or tolerant than, say, the European Victorian moral code.
So you have these newly independent nations that thought to throw off colonial oppression, but they kept the most restrictive, morally judgmental laws of their former colonizers.
And the British Empire, in particular, created the most destructive template for this.
Section 377.
That template was Section 377. It came from the Indian Penal Code of 1862, drafted by the British politician Lord Thomas Babington Macaulay.
And he based it on Britain's own much older Buggery Act.
He did. And he created this wording that was then copied across the world. Whoever voluntarily has carnal intercourse against the order of nature with any man, woman, or animal, would be punished.
And his justification was essentially to impose a superior British moral and legal structure on India. How did that one clause go so viral?
Because the Indian Penal Code was seen as the most efficient, easily transplantable legal code for administering the massive British Empire. It just became the default legal template everywhere, Africa, Asia, the Pacific. It is, without a doubt, one of the most enduring and toxic legacies of British imperialism.
And its spread wasn't uniform, which is why we see such different penalties today.
Exactly. This is a crucial insight. The spread was really haphazard. It depended on the local colonial administrators. So, for example, the administrators in Ghana decided to classify it as a misdemeanor. That means a maximum of 3 years in prison.
Okay.
But in neighboring colonies like Kenya or Nigeria, the administrators treated it as a felony. So you're looking at sentences of up to 14 years.
And then in the most severe cases, like Uganda and Zambia, it was life imprisonment.
Life imprisonment. So a decision made by a colonial official 100 years ago dictates whether a person today faces 3 years or life in prison for the exact same private consensual act.
And we still see the legal fallout from that today.
Clearly. In Kenya, the High Court upheld these colonial-era laws as recently as 2019. They argued that the laws were necessary to protect traditional morality. Morality, ironically, that was imported by the British.
And Tanzania, Zambia, Uganda, they all still have those life sentences on the books?
All inherited from British rule. Now, contrast that with the legacy of other colonial powers, especially Portugal. It's really illuminating.
All 5 former Portuguese colonies have decriminalized.
Every single one. Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Angola. Angola was the latest in 2019.
So what's the difference? Why was the British template so sticky and the Portuguese one wasn't?
Timing is the key. The British imposed Section 377 early on. The Portuguese only applied their legislation to the African colonies very late in 1954.
So it didn't have time to take root.
It didn't have time to take deep legal, institutional, or cultural root. And by that point, Portugal itself was becoming more liberal. So after independence, it was just easier for leaders in those countries to repeal the laws rather than embrace them as part of some new national identity.
The French influence is also more nuanced. Their penal code from 1791 actually decriminalized same-sex activity.
Right, so the French didn't export criminalization. But that, paradoxically, didn't prevent persecution. Several former French colonies passed their own anti-homosexuality laws after independence.
Why?
It was often driven by post-colonial nationalism and a rise in religious conservatism in the 70s and 80s. So countries like Algeria, Cameroon, Chad, they passed new laws based on their own interpretations of religious or indigenous values. Cameroon, for instance, is notorious for aggressive prosecutions, often based on nothing more than how someone looks or acts.
And then we have the reversal in Mali, which is deeply concerning.
The military junta there passed a new law in October 2024, criminalizing same-sex activity with penalties from 2 to 7 years. And the justice minister explicitly justified it by condemning the practice as unnatural.
So that shows it's not just the colonial legacy.
It's not the only driver. Political expediency, the need for a new regime to shore up conservative support, can lead governments to actively create criminalization where it never existed before. The map of persecution is this complex tapestry. It's woven from inherited colonial law, post-colonial politics, and these modern ideological imports.
Okay, so that's the direct criminalization. But now we have to look at the modern, more insidious methods, the indirect repression.
Yes, this is the new frontier. It's about state control that targets visibility, that silences advocacy, often without ever sentencing someone for a private act.
And it's so effective because a government can create this incredibly hostile environment without getting the same international condemnation that comes with, jailing people for who they are.
And the Russia-Hungary model is the key innovation here. It's the one being exported globally. Russia started this in 2013, at first just targeting information available to kids.
But they expanded it.
In December 2022, they broadened the ban to include adults. Now it criminalizes basically any public endorsement or positive mention of LGBTQIA plus identity.
And the vagueness of the language, that's the real weapon.
Precisely. It prohibits the promotion of non-traditional sexual relations. What does that even mean? It's so vague it can be applied to anything. Censoring a movie, shutting down a website, banning a pride parade, raiding a community center.
Wearing a rainbow pin?
It could be. It ensures LGBTQ people are just erased from Russia's public story.
And Hungary was the first EU nation to import this template.
Yes, in June 2021. Their law prohibits sharing any information that promotes homosexuality or trans identities with minors in the media, in ads, in schools. But the really defining toxic feature of the Hungarian law is how it conflates being LGBTQ with being a pedophile.
Which is a false, dangerous claim.
A claim the European Union has strongly condemned for violating fundamental rights. And then, as we said, Hungary took it to a whole new level in March 2025.
Moving from information control to physical surveillance.
The surveillance law is deeply worrying. It doesn't just ban pride events, it authorizes the state to use facial recognition to identify who shows up. The goal is to create a digital record for future harassment, employment discrimination, and to bring criminal charges against organizers. It's a shift from passive repression to active digital persecution in an EU state.
And this model is spreading fast.
ILGA Europe has documented 7 countries in Europe and Central Asia with these kinds of laws: Poland, Georgia.
And it's being used to crack down on education specifically.
Yes, that's a primary target. The laws become the official state tool to ban LGBTQIA+ issues from school curricula. In Russia and Hungary, you have teachers being fired, textbooks censored, school libraries forced to pull books. The classroom is actively weaponized against vulnerable kids.
And there's another insidious tool here, these foreign agent laws.
Also modeled on Russian legislation. We're seeing them pop up in Bulgaria, Georgia, Hungary, Montenegro. They target civil society. Any NGO that gets international funding, which is almost every human rights group, is forced to register as a foreign-funded entity.
Which attaches a huge stigma.
It subjects them to intense surveillance, impossible financial reporting, and this public stigma that just cripples their ability to operate, to raise local funds, or to advocate effectively.
And Georgia's 2024 law is one of the most aggressive versions we've seen.
It's sweeping. It bans pride, public displays of identity, any media representation. It's not just a propaganda law. It's an attempt to completely eliminate public space for the entire community. And they pushed it through despite massive public protests and warnings from the EU.
Even without national laws, local authorities can create these hostile zones. We saw that in Poland.
Yeah, the LGBT-free zones. Between 2019 and 2020, dozens of local Polish governments declared these things. They didn't have real legal force, but they created this palpable, hostile, discriminatory environment. It was incredibly effective at restricting civic space.
So when you add it all up,
When you combine direct criminalization with these indirect methods, the propaganda bans, the surveillance, the foreign agent laws, our data shows that at least 61 UN member states have laws that limit freedom of expression on this topic. Another 61 have legal barriers that stop organizations from even advocating. It's repression through this web of administrative and speech control.
and all of this has a devastating human cost. It is so critical for you, our listener, to understand that this isn't abstract legal theory. It translates into systematic daily discrimination.
It impacts the full spectrum of your life, your health, your job, your housing. The human rights violations are profound, and often they are deadly.
Let's start with healthcare. This is a life and death issue where legal fear completely dictates medical access.
The stats are just clear. They show systemic refusal of care. Studies show 8% of lesbian, gay, and bi individuals report being refused care by a provider, specifically because of their orientation.
And for trans individuals, it's much worse.
It skyrockets to 29%, almost a third.
And even if you do get care, the quality is often terrible.
Right. LGBT adults are twice as likely to report a negative experience, a doctor ignoring them, being disrespectful, or even blaming them for their health problem. And the result of that is devastating.
People just avoid going to the doctor.
26% of LGBTQIA+ people report actively avoiding medical offices altogether to avoid discrimination. And this avoidance, it just fuels a massive public health crisis.
Higher rates of mental health issues, delayed diagnoses.
Chronic depression, anxiety, substance abuse, premature death. And the link to HIV is particularly tragic. In countries where it's criminalized, people are terrified of being arrested, prosecuted, or, critically, being reported to the police by their doctor.
That is such a fundamental betrayal of trust, the idea that your doctor could report you.
In many of these places, healthcare workers are either legally required or socially pressured to report what are seen as immoral behavior. So if you're seeking an HIV test, you're making a choice. Do I risk my freedom to protect my health?
An impossible choice.
And it means these countries have much lower rates of HIV status knowledge and viral suppression. Global health organizations are clear. Decriminalization is a fundamental public health tool.
Okay, let's move to employment. The discrimination here forces so many people into these cycles of poverty.
The legal vulnerability just creates unstable lives. Even in a country like the U.S., 29 states still don't have comprehensive non-discrimination laws. So you can still be fired for your orientation or identity in many places.
And in criminalizing nations, the formal economy can be almost impossible to access.
Because of background checks.
Yeah.
The risk of being outed. It forces people into the informal economy. Casual labor, street vending, survival sex work, jobs with no protections. It just drives people deeper into poverty and exploitation. And transgender women face the absolute worst of this.
Let's talk about education. Schools should be safe havens, but for these kids, they're often sites of intense persecution.
It's a global failure. Only 6 countries in the entire world have specific laws protecting LGBTQIA plus youth from bullying in schools. The vast majority of LGBTQIA plus people report being targeted with slurs, threats, or violence at school.
And we're seeing politicians actively censoring materials, even in parts of the U.S.
The number of anti-LGBTQ bills in U.S. state legislatures has just exploded, over 500 in 2024 alone. They ban books, they restrict classroom discussion, they target trans kids. It's a violation of the right to education.
But in criminalizing countries, it's not just censorship. It's active persecution.
It's devastating. In these nations, teachers might actually participate in the bullying. Or worse, they might report a suspected LGBTQ student to the authorities or their family. This can lead to forced conversion therapy, violence, being thrown out of your home. It isolates these kids and leads to higher dropout rates, severe mental health crises, and tragically higher rates of suicide.
And finally, let's detail the systematic violence and the asylum crisis that results from it all.
LGBTQIA plus individuals face just disproportionate levels of violence. Rape, torture, assault. Often it's from regular people, but it's enabled by the state's refusal to protect them. And false arrests and assault by the police themselves are distressingly common.
And housing insecurity is a direct result of this hostility.
For sure. After Uganda's 2023 law passed, Amnesty International noted this huge spike in evictions. Landlords felt empowered to kick out anyone they suspected of being gay.
And for young people, this often starts at home.
Family rejection. It's intensified by these laws, and it forces kids onto the street. LGBTQ youth are massively overrepresented in the homeless youth population, up to 40% in the U.S. This abandonment makes them acutely vulnerable to exploitation, abuse, and trafficking.
We have to talk about conversion therapy, which our sources explicitly define as torture.
It's a pseudoscientific practice. It's based on the false premise that these identities are disorders that can be cured. Despite being condemned by every major medical and psychological association in the world, it is still legal almost everywhere.
How many countries have banned it?
Only 28. And crucially, only 13 of those are total bans that apply to everyone.
And the methods are brutal. It's not just talking.
The methods are torturous. It ranges from shame-based talk therapy to electroshock, often applied to the genitals, forced medication, physical violence, even sexual assault. It causes profound psychological trauma, PTSD, depression, suicidal ideation. It is a state-enabled form of torture.
So the ultimate consequence of all this is being forced to live underground.
You have an impossible choice. Live in deep secrecy, which means internalize shame, force heterosexual marriages, or flee your home and seek asylum. And asylum seekers face incredible danger and scrutiny. They're often forced to prove their identity in humiliating ways, reliving their trauma just to get protection.
This whole section just shows that criminalization isn't just a law. It is a fundamental denial of a person's right to health, to safety, to economic stability, to basic human dignity.
But despite the gravity of all this, we have to acknowledge the power of the decriminalization movement. Since 2014, 19 countries have repealed these laws.
There is momentum. Change is possible, and it's often being won through courageous court battles.
Absolutely. We have to look at the landmark judicial victories, starting with India's Supreme Court in 2018.
A seismic victory.
For all of South Asia, the Supreme Court struck down Section 377. They explicitly called it a colonial imposition that violated constitutional rights to dignity and identity. The language from the court was so powerful.
Justice Indu Malhotra's quote,
"History owes an apology to members of the LGBTQ community." It became an international rallying cry. It showed that judges can and should hold post-colonial governments accountable for these oppressive, outdated laws.
and it provided a legal template for other countries. Botswana followed.
Yes, the High Court ruling in 2019, which was then affirmed in 2021, was another watershed moment, this time for Southern Africa.
And what were the constitutional grounds there?
They cited violations of privacy, liberty, dignity, and equality. Crucially, the court looked at the real-world impact, the intense stigma and prejudice, and determined that these laws serve no legitimate public purpose in a modern democracy.
And that set a precedent. Namibia followed just this year, June 2024.
The Namibian High Court declared their sodomy laws unconstitutional. Their ruling was so clear, stating that the enforcement of the private moral views cannot qualify as a legitimate governmental purpose. It's a direct challenge to the morality argument that so many of these states use.
Mauritius also struck down its colonial-era law in October 2023.
Yes, the Supreme Court there declared Section 250 unconstitutional, noting it wasn't indigenous to Mauritian values. And the UN specifically highlighted that this decision would be critical in helping end the AIDS pandemic by making it safer for people to get HIV services.
Singapore is a more complex example, though. It's partial progress.
A very careful political balancing act. In 2022, they abolished 377A, which criminalized sex between men. But in the exact same legislative package, they amended their constitution to define marriage as only between a man and a woman.
So they foreclosed marriage equality at the same time.
It was a clear political trade-off. Modernize the penal code, but appease social conservatives on marriage.
And beyond just decriminalization, we are seeing some real advances in recognizing full rights.
Marriage equality is a growing reality. It's now legal in 37 UN member states, plus Taiwan. Thailand's achievement in 2025 was monumental for Asia, allowing adoption, inheritance, full spousal benefits. And on gender recognition, 18 UN member states now allow it based on self-determination.
But, and this is a huge but, we have to stress how fragile this progress is. The backlash is aggressive and the threat of reversal is constant.
The setbacks are devastating, none more so than Trinidad and Tobago in March 2025. The Court of Appeal overturned the 2018 ruling that had decriminalized same-sex acts. The colonial-era penalties were immediately reinstated.
What was the legal reasoning for the reversal?
The court basically said that changing such a culturally entrenched law was a job for Parliament, not the judiciary. It threw the issue back into a political process that's often gridlocked by conservatives. It's a perfect example of how court-won victories are always vulnerable without legislative support.
And we also have the Mali reversal, actively creating new criminalization.
Those two reversals, one judicial, one political, are powerful warnings. Progress isn't linear. The backlash is well-funded, it's strategic, and it's constantly looking for ways to roll back these hard-won rights.
But the fight is ongoing, driven by some powerful international bodies.
Yes. The mandate for the UN's independent expert on SOGI was just renewed in July 2025. And groups like ILGA World, which is a federation of over 2,000 organizations, and Human Rights Watch, they are crucial. They document the abuses and provide the data that fuels all of these legal and legislative battles.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize this. As we've laid out for you today here at the Urban Herald, the current map of persecution seems to be shaped by two overwhelming forces.
You have the enduring destructive weight of colonial history, especially that British Section 377 template.
And crashing into that, you had the modern, insidious tactics of propaganda, surveillance, and digital tracking that are being adopted by regimes from Russia to Hungary.
And our analysis, looking across the full spectrum of human rights, from healthcare and HIV to housing and economic stability, it all leads to one single, irrefutable conclusion.
Decriminalization saves lives.
It saves lives. It is the necessary first step to align national laws with basic human dignity and to allow people to fully participate in society.
The 64 countries that still criminalize, that represents millions of human beings who are denied their fundamental rights. We have to reiterate this. Human rights are universal. They are inalienable. They are not subject to cultural relativism or political games.
The work continues until all 64 of those nations achieve full equality. The path forward requires this sustained commitment. But maybe the most resonant perspective comes from the people whose lives are actually changed by these laws.
We want to end with a sentiment from a Ugandan activist. They were part of the legal team that helped win the decriminalization case in Botswana.
It's a statement that just captures the core of what's at stake.
What did they say?
They said, "For now, we are celebrating. We are no longer considered criminals by the law."
We are no longer considered criminals by the law. That core dignity, the freedom from having your very existence legally defined as a crime, that's the foundational human right at the center of this entire global movement.
And so we ask you, the listener, to really reflect on that simple but profound statement. What does it truly mean to achieve that fundamental recognition of your own humanity?
And what is your ongoing role in ensuring that freedom reaches the millions who are still waiting in those 64 criminalizing nations, often living in the shadow of the death penalty or the surveillance state?
Thank you for joining us for this crucial deep dive.
Here on the Urban Herald.